Okay, good evening, everybody. So I opened the door here so there will be some circulation of air. And when I do it almost immediately, someone is violently closing the door and very uncertain my life. Most probably it will happen any minute. But I want a little bit of, fresh air. So don't be offended by it. This is part of life in the cell. In more than one way, cell, just in both cell, because I'm under arrest here, and both because it's a Shabak cell that, is aimed at threatening my life and trying to rape me, and they can't handle the open door. I don't know why. Do you have any, I don't know why. Is there a reason for that? Because I do not shout, no, and they always shout all the time. It's not that, they are sensitive to sound, Anyway, they absolutely hate it when the door is open. To a point that, they use violence. Is it something with the symbolic language of the Neos? Anyway, any minute it will happen. But, don't be alarmed by it. This is my life, the regular stuff. So this will be a fifth video in the series that I call the Game of Thrones, in which a political phenomenon is discussed, but it's discussed not just from the theoretical perspective, even though I actually, the third part was very theoretical. But the rest should be experiences from my life. And after we are done with that, I will also conduct a short of analysis. But it's incredibly important that we will discuss actual people. And again, my aim is absolutely not to prove that I'm this person or another, because this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Any person that, claims that I am not who I am, or that during my life at some point or all point I was actually, all sort of clones, that interchangeably, fulfilled some kind of a role, and that people spoke from their mouths, and all sort of bizarre theories such like this, should be proven using evidence that is admissible in court. And if it's not, then we should just reject these theories as a kind of very, very sick pagan religion, queer sick pagan religion of maybe perhaps modern types, arguably, of ancient origins, arguably, but certainly currently, in our world, it should be, we should always assume that this is kind of a very, very disturbing religion, and not something that we should pay attention to. Our, as rational creatures, our, default point of view is that this person is just, what's written in his formal CV, what's, he sends to every kind of, job and that, that he wants to, accept it to, and I have CV, and, and if you don't, I can just send whoever want my CV, and we should assume that, if this person have a YouTube channel and he has 1,800 videos, so this is the person in all the videos, the same for his Facebook account, Twitter account, X now account, and other things. And we should assume that the way that this person, that all the public behaviors of this person, and when I say public, everything, everything that we know about him, including private kind of stuff, or evidence of private nature, but only things that are admissible in court. Because evidence that is not admissible in court, there is a reason why it's not admissible in court. It's a shame that I need to mention it, but many people, especially inside intelligence services, think that the issue of admissibility is kind of a nuance that is relevant only to regular people, but to supermans, and presumably they are all supermans, this is just a technicality. This is just a technicality. But it's not a technicality. It's not a technicality. If something is not admissible in court, there is a very good reason for that. Very good reason for that. It's not a technicality. It's not at all technicality. I know, I mentioned many times the original IMF Mission Impossible series from the 60s. It was actually a very good TV show. And I've seen quite a bit of it. when I was a child, the popular was the revival. The 80s revival was actually popular. So as a child, I've seen the 80s revival, but not as an adult, and I'm maybe a little bit. And I consider it. I mean, I didn't like it, but the original was actually interesting, and I've learned quite a bit of it. And one of the things that I've learned about it is that I mean, almost everybody that I know think of themselves as belong to such, groups, and that the Israeli intelligence is mostly relies on such groups. What you think is like, as something that is actually peculiar or bizarre, and I mean, you imagine that if it exists, it's probably very, very rare, and consists of like elite forces of, that the maximally elite, like you see in the movies, with Tom Cruise. But I mean, you imagine that. I mean, you think if it exists in real life, it must be very rare, very, very rare. And also, I mean, just belong to the elite groups of the intelligence sector. But in reality, this is the default mode of operation. This is the default mode of operation, at least in Israel. I don't know how it is in other places. Which means that the Israeli intelligence mode, you hear them screaming, that's, kind of threat. Very soon it will be escalated. That's the way they are. This is an example of Mission Impossible force, but most of what they do in the Israeli intelligence relies on such groups, which means that they have no accountability, no loyalty. They choose their missions, which is, again, like what you see in the IMF series. This is cool. They choose their missions. And unlike what you see, at least not explicitly in the series, they choose their missions almost only, according to financial, consideration, which means they kind of try to calculate how much money, they will spend, or how much, alternative sources of income are lost because they choose to execute this mission, a specific mission, and they estimate how much money they will get from fulfilling it. And by this kind of consideration, they choose whether they want to participate in it. And also in Israel, there is the tea thing that is very common. It's not just money, because they also calculate how much tea they will get from it. But mostly just money. They don't care about anything else. And this kind of, and they have no accountability at all. They have no responsibility, and they have no backup at all. Which means that, nobody will ever kind of help them if they manage to entangle themselves in all sorts of things. And I know, breaking the law is just normal to them. From their perspective, there is no law at all. Besides, you should not be caught. That's it. So this is why this mode of Mission Impossible is actually not only not elitist or rare, it's actually the default mode of operation for the Israeli intelligence. It may be other places as well, but certainly the Shabak and the Mossad are like that. That's the default mode of operation. Groups of people that choose missions, and they choose it, because due to financial, considerations, and they have zero accountability, zero responsibility, and almost zero backup. And everything is about money. Everything is about the money. Sometimes also about the tea, but mostly just about the money. Nothing else beside money and tea. Nothing else. Now, what is the nature of the missions that they get? So there are many kinds of missions, but usually it's something that repeats itself. Things repeat themselves, like in the TV show. There aren't unlimited amount of typical missions. The types, there are several types of missions. That's why they don't need a lot of training, unlike what you see in the shows. Mostly they need to move the parts in their body that produce sound. This is they're almost exclusively. This is almost exclusively their weapon, and almost exclusively the only thing that they know how to do. Just produce sounds. Now the higher echelon of these teams produce the sound from their mouths, and the lower echelons, like what you see surround me now, they do all sorts of bodily noises, and they throw things to the ground, they honk cars, they produce all sorts of noises from their body, not necessarily from their mouths. Like 50% mouth and 50% all sorts of bodily functions that produce sounds. This is typical to what you see all around us now. And the higher echelons, like the ones that were surrounding me most of my life, they use 95% of their sound generation capabilities are done using the mouse. That's what makes them the higher echelon, that they do not fart much or break things or throw things to the ground or honk the car. Of course, most of the team belong to the lower echelons, but my life is not, I didn't live the average life. I lived, yes, most of my life, I was surrounded by people of the, relatively higher echelons since childhood. Actually, my early childhood was, during my history, I was surrounded by people that, at least from the financial point of view, that is not the correct one, I would say, but from the financial point of view, actually the highest were, during primary school. In Ramat Aviv and Ramat Aviv Gimel, the richest people. But all the time, mostly the people use the mouse as their, not only weapon of choice, but only skill. But yes, during the last couple of years, I am always arrested and prosecuted by everybody, and yes, so I am placed in a less and less in the gutters of society, like you see now, and then I kind of see the people of lower echelons that are actually the majority of the people of the Shabak and the Mossad, or that are associated with them, and they are characterized by the fact that only 50% of their noise generation or noise generation actions that in itself it's almost 100% of the actions, but only 50% of it is actually done by the mouse and the tongue. The other 50% is that slamming doors, honking cars, breaking stuff. All sort of, I'm using the body in tremendous, amount of, innovative ways. They are very innovative in the ways that they use their body, outside the mouse, things that are not the mouse, but, are part of their body to produce, all sort of waves. They are very innovative in that. Sometimes even, you cannot but appreciate, how innovative they are. Yes, I know, you think about farts, and it sounds certainly things that they do, and, yes, they do these things as well, but, they are much more innovative than that. I'm serious, they do tremendous amount of bodily sounds. They are really, it's impressive. It is, to me, it wasn't, to an extent, still impressive, because, I was born, as I said, in other echelons of society, and these people are not, that good in, in production of sounds, in ways that are not their mouse. But yes, thanks to this kind of, police persecution and prosecution by the court that I'm subject to in the last couple of years, I was able to actually be exposed to a variety of new innovative ways, new to me at least, maybe they are not new in the general sense, but new ways of sound generation that I, as a child and a young adult, and even up to the age of 30, I didn't know about that these things exist. But they exist, and actually they are, extremely, diverse. Amazing. It's really interesting. It's actually, fascinating, David Attenborough, National Geographic, documentary, all the various ways in which these people can produce noise, not by the mouse. Not that they don't use the mouse, they use the mouse all the time. But on top of that, they have tremendous, variety of ways of sound generation. All sort of, not just, you think about farts, but not just farts. No, not at all. Not at all. Yes, farts are part of this. They are expert in farts, yes. But it's much more complicated than that. It's tremendously more complicated than that. But overall, that's what they do, these Mission Impossible teams. They produce noise. Now, why do I mention Mission Impossible, the original Mission Impossible? Because, another thing, one important thing that you can learn from this series that I want to kind of present. Mostly, this series, it got 7 seasons, or 6 or 7 seasons. And during most of its broadcast, it was the 60s, or maybe early 70s, but during most of this broadcast, the TV show was tremendously influenced by the Cold War, which is not a surprise. So most of what they done was all sort of missions that are in essence of military, I would say, characteristics in the broad sense. But it almost always, I mean, they acted, I mean, in all sort of like, I mean, in countries that were completely fake. Like they had all sort of like, I mean, tremendous amount of fake names of countries that, that should, like, that, I mean, but it was very thin, kind of a mask over, I mean, it's supposed to be all sort of like, republics of the USSR that are probably of lesser significance, but I mean, they didn't want to actually conduct these things in the USSR, in the fictional world, I guess because, maybe just, maybe just, not to offend, unnecessarily offend the USSR, and that's actually a smart move because, or maybe just to allow themselves, more kind of like, additional, freedom, artistic freedom, because if it's like a fake place, I mean, so you can fake all sorts of other stuff. If it's a real place, you still need to confine yourself to all sorts of, real life facts and consideration. But I tend to assume that it's also something, not only just, freedom of artistic freedom, but also that, I mean, it's probably, I mean, if people like, would have seen like, season after season of like, military actions against the USSR, it would have like left a bad taste in their mouths, even in the height of the Cold War. So, I mean, these kind of fictional, places, I mean, allow the audience to be, to understand that, yes, these are Russians in the broad sense, and we don't like the Russians, so the Russians are the bad guys. So they immediately kind of like, have, emotional, attachment, to the ethical framework of what they see, which is often very, very dubious. So, I mean, they need this kind of like ethical attachment, but also without being too much uncomfortable because of this kind of like, watching again and again how people commit actually, breaking the law and commit dubious acts against actual countries and actual people that, I mean, might not deserve it. And anyway, this is like, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth. But actually, even that kind of like compromise, a very smart one between, I mean, that allowed both emotional attachment of the audience at the time and also, I mean, left like, artistic freedom and avoided, I mean, too much, kind of like political problems. Actually, even that became stale at some point. And famously after the third season, the person that was not the main character, but mainly, I mean, many people actually consider them, to be like, a show, how do you say, like, what's the name of like Fonzie, like a person that is not supposed to be the main character, but I mean, steals like, the attention. So who is this guy? Like a Jewish actor. He died. I mean, not that long ago, but he was a Jewish actor. What was his name? I don't remember his name. He played, I mean, very late in his career, he played in, Plane 9 of Out of Space, like, the Ed Wood, the half-fictional biopic. I don't remember his name. So, but I mean, many consider him like the main, he was perhaps the most likable character, I mean, besides, I mean, the hot one, the woman that was like good-looking, I mean, but I mean, it's like two methods of like, popularity. She was popular by being hot, and he was popular by just stealing the show, like Fonzie, like stealing the show. I don't remember his name, Jewish actor. But I mean, like after 3 seasons, this was too much for them, like, I mean, because it was really repetitive. And famously, it was replaced with Leonard Nimoy, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure, almost certain it was Leonard Nimoy. Just after the Star Wars thing ended, and before it became popular again. So Leonard Nimoy did this thing. So they continue with the same charades, with the fictional, USSR republics for another 2 seasons. But then it became stale. Really, I mean, everybody considered it stale. So they thought, so during the 6th season, I think it was the last one, or maybe the last 2 seasons, 6th and 7th, probably the last one, the 6 seasons, they decided to change the direction completely. Like, stop all this kind of, like, spying, missions in Lusitania, or all sorts of, fictional names for, non-existent USSR republics. And instead, they almost exclusively worked inside the United States of America, in US soil. which was completely atypical until then, and it was a change of direction, like a new thing. And what they done, and their missions were almost always surrounding law enforcement in a very, very elastic way, But the idea was to catch criminals and to put them to justice inside the United States. But the question, so this is kind of like this allows like a new fertile ground for the creators of the show, for the showrunners. I mean, to kind of like, to put some kind of interest in the show that became really stale until then. Because, I mean, how much can you watch people with Russian accent, and, suitcases with atomic bombs? I mean, yeah, it was nice, but I mean, for 5 years, and each season was like 20 episodes at least, 25. So after 100 times, of this Russian, accent, villains, I mean, it becomes like, too much. And this kind of new direction allowed them a new fertile ground, to explore. Using the same characters and many of the same kind of tropes and technologies, fictional technologies, but a completely different ground, like artistic ground, and also actual ground because it's inside the United States. In one famous episode, and actually original one, the villain was actually William Shatner, and it was famous because they created like a unbelievably complicated, like convoluted charade. And even for them it was convoluted. Like where it presumably gets back in time, like it returns in time. So it's actually very original and kind of like, even outlandish, even like by the standards of this show that was always outlandish. But what's that? But why are they needed? there is the FBI, and police force, and so let the FBI, regular, criminals should be treated by the police or maybe state police. And if it's like too much even for the state police, so that's why the FBI is there. And the FBI, while actually it was actually created and consolidated as a major American body pretty late in American history. Pretty late. It should be said that actually, the history of the FBI is shorter than what you could have assumed. But still, during the 60s, it was, the late 60s, it was already, consensual, body, and all American accepted. It took them actually time for that. It took actually time for that to happen because the Americans, for a long time they had tremendous traditional reservations against federal police force. So actually, the FBI was created and become strong and accepted force, or a black body and force pretty late in American history. But yes, by the 60s it was already widely accepted, by the people. So what's the problem with the FBI? If these criminals are of such magnitude that regular police or state police cannot handle them. So presumably, according to and I think that this view, what I say now, actually is presented like in explicitly in like an introduction to the 6th series, or even to the introduction of every episode. So the idea is that some criminals, it's impossible to catch them by the FBI and certainly by regular police, because regular methods of law enforcement, could not produce evidence that are admissible in court. Just regular law enforcement cannot produce the evidence. So that's why, in such cases, we need the IMF force. But of course, you can ask, but if it's true that it's so hard to get evidence that are admissible in court, even by the FBI, the question is, how do we know that these are actual criminals? So the answer is that because the showrunner tells us. Because the showrunner tells us. Because otherwise, why is there even an episode? The episode exists because these characters are criminals. Otherwise, why do we even need to watch it? So presumably there is no moral, problem in sending a group of terrorists, which is the IMF force, to terrorize these people, to break any kind of law on US soil, to break any kind of law, to terrorize these people without end, to prosecute them, to steal from them, to torture them, in order to get the evidence that will be admissible in court. And we do know that it's possible, theoretically, to get such an evidence because these people are very bad. They are bad. And how do we know that they are bad? Again, because the show others tells us that they are bad. Now, it should be said, from our perspective, it's kind of dubious. If you think about it a little bit. It's kind of dubious. And why do we even think about it? Because I am that guy. Like, I am William Shatner, for example. I just remember him because, I mean, it was a very famous, episode. But I am that guy, but a completely innocent one. I am that guy that, I mean, everybody knows that he's a villain, a very bad guy, because otherwise, I mean, what's the purpose of the show? But, I mean, nobody ever produced any evidence against him that are admissible in court, for some reason. So the only way to put him to justice is to send IMF teams to terrorize his life, and presumably they will be able to actually acquire the evidence that is admissible in court, because they have methods that are extraordinary. And by extraordinary, I mean completely, unlawful and completely unethical. But it's okay that they use them because I'm the bad guy. And how do we know that I'm the bad guy? Because otherwise, I mean, what's the purpose of the show? What's the purpose of the show otherwise? And what happens if such an IMF team fails to, produce the evidence? No problem, we send another one, because we actually don't have just one like you see in the TV show. We actually have hundreds of such teams, because this is our intelligence service. So if one fails, we send the other team, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and the 100s. Presumably, eventually, one of these IMF teams will acquire the evidence that are admissible in court. And what happened to the person in the meantime? He's terrorized by an endless groups of psychopaths that, I mean, have no law and can do whatever they want to him. And how do we justify that? But he's the bad guy. You know that. So you don't need to feel sorry about him. You need to feel sorry about his victims. But who are his victims? And it's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, but surely, I mean, he has victims because he's the bad guy, and you know that bad guys have victims. And again, but how do we know that he's a bad guy? Because otherwise, what's the purpose of the show? What's the purpose of the show otherwise? What's the purpose of the show otherwise? So he must be the bad guy. So if he's the bad guy, of course he has victims. So you should think about the victims. Think about how much they suffer. It's immoral to think about how much he suffers and not about the victims. You should think about the victims. This is my life up to and including this moment. These are these people. But they're not the first team. They're team number 100. All sent by the state to produce evidence that are admissible in court, because regular law enforcement cannot do it. And when they fail, they send another team. And what are their methods, like their extraordinary method? Torture. Torture without any accountability to the law. They can do whatever they want. Torture. Endless torture. But I mean, it's okay because I'm the bad guy, Otherwise, what's the purpose of the show? What's the purpose of the show otherwise? And besides, everybody knows that I'm the bad guy, It's kind of like a known thing, It just, there are no evidence that are admissible in court. It's technicalities, for gray lawyers, and and he's so I mean, he said these are technicalities, but everybody knows that he's the bad guy. I mean. Also, I mean, think about it, it wasn't the first team that hunts him. Like, so many other teams hunted him before. So, I mean, every single team of these teams knew that he's the bad guys. Otherwise, why did they took the mission? Not that they care, about ethics, but, I mean, they do care about, about chances to succeed in their mission. I mean, they wouldn't choose to participate in a mission that has no chance to actually have success, because then they waste their time. And they waste, potential income from other, courses of action. So all these teams actually thought that they would have the chance to have success in their mission. So it means that all of them knew that he's the bad guy. And these are people that have, it's not just people from the streets. They are part of the Shabak. They are people of, of substance, of gravitas. So all these people knew that he's the bad guy. And it's also, another proof that of course he's the bad guy. Of course. I mean, everybody knows that he's the bad guy. Of course, he's the bad guy. Just, technicality. You need to he thinks, the law is so complicated, and the law in our time is so complicated, and many times criminals just escape justice because of all sorts of very convoluted letters of the law that allows them to escape justice. But think about the victims. But the victims are real. You should think about the victims. Think about the victims. You should not sorry about this person. You should be sorry about the victims of this person. Think about the victims. Now, all of that, this is everybody that I mentioned in this series, all were part of such teams. And the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, this team obviously, they don't have they're not very skilled, even if in what they do, even if they belong to the higher echelons of society. In their presumably law enforcement capabilities, they are just every punk in the street. So we need to ask ourselves, how are they created? מהו כור מחצבתם? How are these, the state, places the values that and the attitudes toward life that are typical to them inside of them. Under what circumstances? And since they are all very much alike, it must be some kind of unified way of education. Something that almost all, are going through of these types of mission impossible forces. So how does it happen? How does it happen? Or when does it start? Under what circumstances? So the answer is the military service. And that's what I'm going to discuss now, in the next video that I will start very soon. The military service, but not for the purpose specifically of discussing a specific branch of the military, but as an example of how do you educate such people, or how you, made them have a common, a shared, Agaz Kilim, they said in Hebrew, like toolbox of attitudes and methods that they should use, in their various missions throughout their lives. So that's the topic of the next video. I should just say that, I started my military service, maybe, perhaps in an age it was a little bit, maybe younger than, the average, but, still it doesn't mean that, you cannot learn from it. It's just, it's just, something that should be noted, that, I was relatively young when it started. But, let's discuss this in the next video.